Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us here on Time Warner Cable News. I am Solomon Syed. We are live right now at noon, continuing our coverage of the top story of the day. We've been told that at any moment now, we do expect the NCAA to release its findings in the investigation into Syracuse University's athletic program. This morning, the NCAA announcing that it would be making its final report public at 12 p.m. in just a few moments, followed by a news call at 1 p.m. Our plan is to stay with you live here until that report is released. We're going to break it all down for you, including full analysis from our sports team. And speaking of that, let's bring in Sports Director Mark Larson. Mark, thank you for joining me here. And as we await this report, obviously everybody wondering just how serious these sanctions could be.
Yeah, Sol, it's been a little more than a month since Syracuse announced its own penalties, its self-imposed ban for the postseason. And so we're going to find out if that's enough in the eyes of the NCAA or if they're going to add to it. I think a lot of talk surrounds scholarships. A lot of times what happens is the NCAA will not only ban you from the postseason but also affect you in the future by limiting scholarships, taking one or two away from the basketball program for a year or maybe two. So that could affect how things go as far as recruiting. Syracuse right now is chasing a kid. I think it's pretty well known, Thomas Bryant, a big kid. And so obviously if a scholarship gets taken away, they're already one over the limit with the guys they have coming in. So they already have to kind of, free one up, whether that means having someone transfer or something like that. So they already have to free one up. So if they get some taken away, it's obviously going to affect if they can bring in Thomas Bryant or not. So as we all know, it's not just, the 1 year that you get penalized. It adds up. So when you get scholarships taken away, that can have an effect 2, 3, 4 years down the road where you think you're going to have players and you don't end up having those players. So pins and needles, I guess, SU fans waiting to see what happens. Again, that's supposed to come out any moment now. We're on the NCAA website. And as you said, they're going to have a call at 1 o'clock to further explain their findings. It's been 4 months since Jim Boeheim and Scott Schaefer, the SU football coach, went out to Chicago and met with the NCAA Committee on Infractions. So it's been a long time coming for this. And finally, we're going to find something out today, which is a good thing. Now, Syracuse, the basketball team itself, has not left town yet. They're heading down to Raleigh, North Carolina in just a little bit for their final game of the season, as it turns out, tomorrow, a noon start with North Carolina State. And that's it. No ACC tournament next week, and of course no NCAA tournament because of these self-imposed ban. And we'll see if the NCAA decides that is enough, or they're going to add to it and maybe do the same thing for next year. And I think most SU fans are really hoping that this is it, that we only have to suffer through this year and the Orange can get back into March Madness next year. Again, it's not just the SU basketball program we're talking about either. It's also the SU football team. Scott Schaefer was in front of that committee, so there could be some scholarship limitations there. There could be some a postseason ban there, perhaps, if it warrants it. They can also have the probation thing going on, where you're kind of you're very much on the watch and they're on the clock, and if you mess up doing anything else, then more serious penalties can be imposed. But it's all speculation at this point, Sal. That's what we've been doing. That's what we did leading up to the SU self-imposed ban, and now, any moment now, we're going to find out what the NCAA has to say about all this, and whether or not it's enough or they're going to add to it. So now, Mark, we shall see as we go on.
Now, Mark, I see some reports starting to trickle out here. Obviously, we don't have some of this confirmed. Some stipulations against Coach Jim Boeheim. It looks like that might be the case. Also, like you were saying, a loss of some of the scholarships. Don't want to speculate further right now. We don't have any of that confirmed, but obviously that would have an impact on the team. And Mark, I think you covering the team this year, you have seen maybe some of the impact already taking effect. I know some of the outspoken members of this team, namely Trevor Cooney, he came out and said he thought this was frankly unfair, that they are suffering the penalty for some of the sins that were committed by past infractions, and he felt like it was unfair that they had to kind of feel the wrath of that, not being able to compete in the postseason this year, awaiting word on if there is any further postseason ban. But Mark, just speak to that a little bit. The players themselves this year especially just being kind of disappointed in how this has all worked out.
Yeah, I think so, Saul, and the fans have chimed in with that too. You've seen the Free Rakeem posters, people feeling bad for the Syracuse senior Rakeem Christmas, who's having a great year and not getting a chance to play in the postseason. But the players have responded really well to it, actually, as disappointed as we would expect them to be. Since this was announced, in the last 8 games or so, they've played their best basketball of the season. And, you know, with the Duke game maybe accepting, they played very well. And we expect them to play well again tomorrow in their final game of the season. So the players have really persevered through this. And I'm just being handed what we know about this. And basically what it says, I'll just read it to you. It says the violations include academic misconduct, which we speculated with Fab Melo being suspended for academics twice during the 2011 and 12 season. Also James Sutherland suspended during the 2013 season. Academic misconduct, extra benefits, the failure to follow its drug testing policy, and impermissible booster activity. Other violations found included impermissible academic assistance and services, the head basketball coach's failure to promote an atmosphere of compliance and monitor his staff, and the school's lack of control over its athletic program. So that's what some of what we are seeing now. Penalties, in this case, not including those self-imposed by the school, include 5 years of probation, financial penalties, reduction of 3 men's basketball scholarships per year for 4 years. So, okay, let me read that again. 3 men's basketball scholarships per year for 4 years. And you're talking about, you know, they only have 15 scholarships. Well, they have 15 people. I think they have 12 scholarships. So now you're taking away 3. That's a significant number, and it's a 4-year thing. So that is a very significant reduction in scholarships. It also calls for a vacation of wins in which ineligible students participated, a 9-conference game suspension for the head basketball coach. So it appears as if Coach Boeheim will be suspended for the first half of the ACC season next year. And it also calls for men's basketball recruiting restrictions for 2 years. And lastly, it says, additionally, the panel accepted the school's 1-year postseason ban in men's basketball, among other measures outlined. So, to sum all that up, what I just said in that one paragraph, it's a very meaty paragraph. The 1-year ban has been accepted by the NCAA, so it appears as if Syracuse will be eligible for the postseason again starting next year. It also appears as if Coach Boeheim will be suspended for the first half of the ACC season next year, 9 games in the 18-game schedule. So that's a significant suspension for Coach Boeheim. It also calls for a vacation of wins in which ineligible students participated. It does not, at least as far as I can see right now, I can't see what those wins would be. Again, these violations reportedly go back 10 years. And so it's getting close to that championship season, and we can only obviously hope that none of those wins will be vacated. But if you're talking about vacating wins, and we're looking at Jim Boeheim when he passed the 900 win mark, he's at 965, I believe, right now. So he could be moved back and be even farther away from 1,000. So lots to kind of digest here. It also, again, calls for the scholarship reductions of 3 per year for 4 years. And again, when you're talking about a team right now, Syracuse plays, you know, 6, maybe 7 guys, okay, scholarship-wise. They have, and forgive me for not knowing, I think it's 12 scholarships total. So if you're taking away 3 per year, that's a 4th. That's a 4th for 4 years, not just for next year, but for 4 years. So I talked about earlier, before we knew what was going on, Syracuse had already 1 too many scholarships committed to for next year. So they already were one over. And now if this is true and this comes through, which I'm reading it, that would mean they're 4 over. So you talk about 4 scholarship players that they're going to have to find another place for. So I want to play something that Coach Boeheim said Wednesday. He had his press conference to talk about the upcoming basketball gala, but he also was kind of coerced into talking about his team and the season and the future. And he said something pretty interesting that leads me to believe he knew this was coming, talking about some major changes for next year. Let's see if we can play that for you. This is from Wednesday afternoon.
Through some tremendous changes in this off season, and we're going to have to see how it all comes together in September. See who's here and see, what direction we're going to go. We don't know really much right now. You never know who's going to be here. Recruiting's still going on. You never know what's going to happen. I have no idea who's going to be here next year. I never do. I thought Jeremy Grant and Tyler Ennis were going to be here this year. They aren't.
Okay, so smiling there, but my guess is Coach Boeheim not smiling right now. And here's some more specifics that I found later on this release. Penalties and measures prescribed by the panel are below. Here we go. Number 1, 5 years of probation from March 6, 2015, that's today, through March 5th, 2020. Vacation of all wins in which ineligible men's basketball students played in 2004-05. Okay, so we're past the championship. 2005-06, 2006-07, 2010-11, and 2011-12. Okay, so they're going to vacate wins from those 5 basketball seasons, 04-05, 05-06, 06-07, 10-11, and 11-12. Okay, so Fab Mello played during 10-11 and 11-12, so I think we can probably make that assumption that it has to do with him. The 04 through 07 seasons, there was some talk about allowing players to play that had failed drug tests. So that's my guess. That's what that involves. But you're looking at Fab Mello now. Of course, he was only here 2 years and developed into the Big East Defensive Player of the Year as a sophomore, but was again suspended twice during that season, including for the NCAA tournament, because of some academic issues that we weren't told any specifics about. That apparently is now going to cost Syracuse. Not only did it cost them a Final Four that year, it's also going to cost them some wins from those 2 seasons. I also want to point out there is a vacation of wins also for football, for ineligible football students from 04, 05 to 06, 07. So those 3 seasons also, there will be vacation of wins. And if you think about how many games Syracuse football won during those 3 seasons, there weren't many. So they're going to have to give up whatever games they did win, or some of them, during which ineligible football students played. The third thing that it says, penalties and measures prescribed by the panel, a fine of $500 per contest played by ineligible students. So again, it's not giving us a number of games this is, but $500, it doesn't seem like a very hefty fine there. It's just more of a kind of a slap on the wrist as far as the fine goes, but I think vacating the wins is much bigger than that. Number 4, the school must return to the NCAA all funds it has received to date through the former Big East Conference revenue sharing for its appearances in the 2011, 2012, and 2013 NCAA men's basketball tournament. So that's much more significant money. Obviously, you're talking about Big East Conference revenue sharing for Syracuse when they participate in those 3 NCAA tournaments. So that money is also going back to the NCAA. Point number 5, suspension of the head men's basketball coach for the first 9 conference games of 2015-16. So as I said before, Coach Boeheim it sounds like, will be suspended for the first half of the ACC season next year, and certainly not a good thing. Number 6, reduction of men's basketball scholarships by 3 for the next 4 seasons, 2015 through 2019. It says if the school has already executed scholarship offers for next year, the school may begin the 4-year penalty in 2016-17. So, all right, so Syracuse was already 1 scholarship too many. They're saying if Syracuse wants, they can delay this penalty 1 year, but it's still going to be 4 years. But they could start it in 2016-17, so they don't have to, rescind the scholarship offers from these kids that they're already bringing in. All right, a point, I don't know what point this is, 7 or 8. Reduction in the number of permissible off-campus recruiters from 4 to 2 during June 1st, 2015 through May 31st, 2017. So 2 years, Syracuse will only have 2 off-campus recruiters instead of 4. And, we all know how important recruiting is. All right, so that's, again, I think a significant penalty. The second to last penalty here, the panel, it just says the panel also accepted the self-imposed postseason ban for this year, but noted that self-imposition of penalties after the conclusion of infractions hearings does not influence the outcome. Okay, so they're saying just because Syracuse self-imposed a ban, that doesn't mean that the NCAA took that into account. They were going to do what they were going to do regardless of that. It just so happens that they agree with that penalty. All right, and then the last one, it says additional self-imposed penalties can be found in the public decision. So there must be another piece of paper that I have to read for that. Okay, so, wow. Okay, good. Our crack staff has put together all of this on one big page for us so we can recap what I've just been talking about for the last 10 minutes or so since we got our hands on the NCAA report. Again, this is 4 months after Syracuse met with the NCAA out in Chicago. This is what they've come up with. 5 years of probation through March 5th of 2020. A 4-year reduction of men's scholarships, basketball scholarships, and that's a 3 scholarship reduction for 4 years. So it's 12 scholarships, and they can either start this coming season, 2015-16, or they can start it the year after that and go 4 years. A 9-conference game suspension for Coach Boeheim. So the first half of the ACC season next year, he will not be able to be on the bench. Financial penalties, again, $500 per contest played by ineligible students. And all the money that Syracuse got from the 2011, 12, and 13 NCAA tournaments has to go back to the NCAA. And men's basketball recruiting restrictions also for 2 years. Again, they go from 4 off-campus recruiters down to 2. And what we don't have on there is also the vacation of wins. Vacation of wins meaning, you take those wins and you give them back. So they don't go down as wins anymore. So Coach Boeheim, as I said, at 965 some odd wins, somewhere in that area. So depending on how many wins that is, and again, it's for 5 seasons, we could be talking about 40, 50 wins. He might be back under 900 when this is all said and done. So once we get the number on that, then we can figure that out. Coach Boeheim, 966 wins is what he's sitting at right now, pending the outcome of this NCAA penalty. All right, so the team, again, is digesting all of this right now, just as you are, just as we are. They have not left yet for North Carolina. Their final game of the season tomorrow at noon at NC State, and we understand they're getting ready to leave pretty soon. Some of the players have been making their way inside the Mello Center, and we assume going to be boarding a bus very soon. Right now, let's go up to the Mello Center, check in with Brian Mueller, who's standing by there. Maybe he knows more about what the team is doing right now. But Mules, this is obviously a lot for them to digest, and we're talking about less than 24 hours before they have to get on the court and play.
Yeah, Mark, we talked about this team dealing with distractions all year, and this is going to be a huge distraction for this team, even though there's only 1 game left in the season. And for some players, this doesn't affect them too much since it's happened years ago. It's still going to be something that most likely will be on their minds as they head down to North Carolina for this season finale. against NC State. Now, right now, the scene behind me at the Mello Center is pretty quiet right now. We have seen Michael Benajay pull up. He went into the Mello Center, so we've seen one player so far, but other than that, it's been pretty quiet. SU actually has a security guard standing at the doors of the Mello Center, making sure only the right people are going in right now, meaning the SU basketball team. But so far, not too much going on here. I can't tell you the players will be eating Jimmy John's on their way to the airport today, but it will be interesting to see what type of effort this Orange team has when they get out on the court on Saturday. As we talked about before, this team already has had to deal with the distraction of a postseason ban. How will this affect them in the season finale? We asked about motivation. What would their motivation be the rest of the year? And the players basically say they've been playing for themselves all year, not really caring that they're not going to the postseason, but playing for Christmas. His last game is tomorrow, so I'm sure that will be a rallying point for this team. But we'll certainly stay here for all day, seeing what's going on here from the scene at the Mello Center as players come in. Of course, that 1 p.m. Press conference coming up as well. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, Brian, one more thing, just you know, from the outset and your initial reaction to this, mine is that it's harsher than I expected, especially when you talk about taking 3 scholarships away per year for the next 4 years, and you talk about a 9-game suspension next year in the ACC for Coach Boeheim. I don't know if any of us expected it to be this harsh. Is that your reaction too?
Yes, that's exactly my reaction, Mark. I remember when there was talk of the NCAA coming down on SU. The vacation of wins was another thing that a lot of people were talking about. I know most people were speculating that it'd be maybe 30 to 40 wins, but as you mentioned, Mark, we're talking about 6, 7 seasons of wins being vacated for the program, and I think that will almost certainly take them down to 900, below 900, I should say. So if there is a bright spot in all of this, we may get to celebrate 900 for Coach Boeheim again in a year or two. But in all seriousness, it is a very harsh penalty. It will be interesting to see how this affects recruiting. Jim Boeheim, of course, in his Wednesday presser, as we talked about earlier in the week, talked about how some guys may not be coming back, and we really didn't know what that meant. But now with this amount of reduction in scholarships, it could mean that some guys may not be able to come into the program that were planning on coming in a year or two ago and going forward through the years. And it's just kind of funny, the symmetry here. 3 years ago, we were standing here in this very spot in front of the Mello Center talking about Fab Mello, how he was suspended from the NCAA tournament. And now today, 3 years later, of course, Fab Mello was a big part of this investigation, and now we're starting to see what happened as a result of that.
Yeah, I think we heard about Fab Mello, and I'm just kind of trying to read through it again as you're talking here about what happened, and it doesn't sound like there was any major violation, but just a series of violations. We're talking about some academic misconduct. We're talking about booster misconduct. We're talking about letting players play when they perhaps failed drug tests. As it says here, the school did not follow its own drug policy. So a lot of things just kind of added up, I think, and basically it says during a 10-year period of violations, the head basketball coach did not promote an atmosphere of compliance within his program and did not monitor the activities of those who reported to him as they related to academics and booster involvement. So, it all comes down to the head coach. But you and I both know how much the coaches are responsible for beside all of this other stuff. So, I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say is I think a lot of little things added up, it sounds like, and there wasn't any major one big thing that caused the hammer to drop. But I guess the best thing is there's only 1 year of a postseason ban, and after that, Syracuse can play in the postseason. So if you talk about recruits, Syracuse can still do what it wants to do at the end of the year, but you have to get the right kids now because you're 3 scholarships short for the next 4 years. That's a big deal.
It's a huge deal, as you point out, Mark. And one thing that's interesting, too, with Jim Boeheim is many times in the past when there have been transgressions with this team, and we talked to Jim Boeheim and asked him about that, he many times takes kind of the laissez-faire approach and says, listen, I'm just the coach. I don't control what the players do outside of the time they come to practice and the games. And it seems like, Mark, what this report is saying is basically that Jim Boeheim should have been a little more involved in some of the finer details of his program and some of the things that were maybe going on away from the basketball court in the past 10 years or so. But the scholarship reduction is huge, especially for how long it's going to happen for the next 3 to 4 years. And obviously SU pretty much every year has a top 10 recruiting class. Will that change over the next few years with this scholarship reduction? It'll be interesting to see.
Yep, sure will. All right, thanks very much, Brian. Get back to us when and if you see the team starting to board up, and we'll hope to check in with you again a little bit later on. Right now, I want to go to Brad Vivacqua. He's been trying to digest this report. He's been reading through it and thinks he's got a little bit of a breakdown. Brad's in the newsroom. Brad, what do you make of all this? It seems, again, Mueller and I at least think it seems a little harsh.
Yeah, a little harsh, Mark. That's, of course, obviously the last couple of years we've been able to go on the road and talk to some fans. Obviously, you've covered your share of players over the years during the postseason, the ACC, and even going back in the Big East tournament. And then, of course, we've been able to travel all over the country and catch up with fans. And obviously, fans have a lot to digest with this. But, of course, it is tough to take. The thing is, first, that 5 years of probation, obviously, from this year, this point, on to 2020, we're going to have to see what happens. But, obviously, the NCAA accepting the ban taken by SU, now we'll have to see what happens in the future. But knowing going forward, the good thing is that it looks like right now that the team will be able to participate in the postseason in future years after this year. Just wanted to break down your thoughts there. 5 years of probation, and then the vacation of all those wins starting in 2004 really to 2007, then picking back up in 2010. Your take on that? Some big games, obviously, during that time. But the good news is, if you're a fan, that year 2003, the national championship year, no penalty with that particular year. So therefore, that is good news. Also, the football students, those years 2004, 2005, 2005 to 2006, and 2006 to 2007, we'll have to see where it goes with that. But obviously, some wins during those years taken away from that. Mark?
Okay, Brad, and like you said, I think, the fact that the 2003 championship is not going to be affected is a good thing, and the fact that they can be in the postseason after this year is a good thing, so that will help keeping those recruits coming in. But I've finally found the magic number. 13 is the limit for college basketball teams as far as scholarships go. So if you go from 13 down to 10 for 4 years, that's going to have a cumulative effect. And you talk about Coach Boeheim in his 70s now. How long is he going to want to keep coaching if his hands are kind of tied like that? That's something else that we've got to think about. But the 9-game ACC suspension as well. The money doesn't seem like a big fine to me as far as that goes, but 9 games. And if you think about 9-game suspension, there's some of the money we're talking about, $500 per contest. And again, we don't have a number of games right now, but let's say it's 30, 40 games. All right, so if it's, 40 games, that means it's $20,000. That's nothing. It's nothing. For you and me, that's a lot, but it's nothing for Syracuse University. So in my mind, the scholarship thing is the big thing, Brad. Going from 13 down to 10, you talk about all the players they bring in every year, and the players they already have on the roster, and they're going to have to move some people out.
That's right. Yeah, those suspension of the scholarships is a big deal, and I think that's what fans are really probably most concerned with when you look at that. So many years in a row, when you think about over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, where Syracuse was pre-ranked in the top 25, a lot had to do, of course, with the scholarship players, and now when we catch up with fans eventually, we're probably going to have to ask them that question. Are they concerned really with the quality of players that come to this university? Obviously, so much goes into the hype when we enter the month of March. Obviously, not as much this year with the fact that Syracuse will not be participating in the postseason. But again, when you talk about the suspension of those scholarships, obviously the big factor that fans will be concerned with when they see this report.
That's right, Brad. All right, well, thanks much, and sorry we won't be getting a little Bojangles next week down at the ACC tournament, but we can look forward to that next year, although the tournament's in D.C. next year. But anyway, thanks, Brad. Thanks for helping us break that down. All right, we're going to go back now to Solomon Syed. He's got a legal expert to help figure this all out, break it down in legalese, hopefully in layman's terms. Sol?
All right, Mark, Brad, and Brian, thanks for that. I'm joined here by Graig Zappia from the Tully Rinckey law firm, just like you said, Mark, to break it all down for us. And Graig, it seems like the prevailing consensus here, these stipulations, these sanctions, a lot more harsher than people expected.
Yeah, when you look in comparison to how other schools have fared in these type of scenarios, the one big thing that sticks out is actually the suspension of Coach Boeheim. They looked at this, it appears, the committee looked at it and noticed that he had a hand in some of this, and a lot of times it stops with the man in charge. And in this case, the committee looked and said, all right, you handpicked the person that's supposed to oversee these operations. We told you what you needed to do, and they handed down, which in my opinion is pretty extensive when you talk about the scholarships over the course of the next 4 years and the individual suspension of Coach Boeheim. That's pretty tough stuff.
Mark kind of referenced this too. There wasn't one act that kind of brought the hammer down. It's almost, as the saying goes, death by paper cut. A lot of infractions here, specifically as far as academic misconduct and drug misconduct.
Right, exactly. And when you talk about the drug misconduct, the big thing that comes out of the report is the fact that they were told to put your guidelines in place, follow your own written guidelines, and they failed to do that. So as far as the drug suspensions that come up, they knew what they were supposed to do, and still they failed to follow those guidelines. And it's over a number of years, going back to 2001 even.
Do you think it bought them any goodwill with the committee? It's noted in the report here that Coach Boeheim actually admitted that they didn't follow their own policy.
I think that, in conjunction with the fact that they got out ahead of it as far as banning themselves for this year's postseason, I think that helped out a little bit, because what usually happens in these cases where the lie is worse than what actually went on, the cover-up is always worse than the crime. And in this case, getting out ahead of it, when I'm advising clients, that always seems to help with some type of investigation like this. You get out in front of it, you admit some wrongdoing, you kind of impose the ban on yourself. It kind of gets you in the good graces, but unfortunately this was so overwhelming over an extensive period of time. It's hard to get out from underneath everything. Does
the committee typically kind of differentiate here? And you talked about the severity of the punishment when you compare it to schools like USC, who kind of had a lot of booster violations. These types of violations almost speak to the integrity of the student-athlete situation. It kind of takes them away from really being students, because they shouldn't be eligible to compete in these games once you break down the academic violations and the drug violations.
Right, yeah, that's the big thing. They hammered on the point that it was an academic integrity issue. You talk about the student-athlete, student comes first. I know we all laugh a little bit when that comes up, but that's what the committee talked about. There were rules in place, advisors in place to help these students out. Whether or not they followed the direction of what they were supposed to do, their own internal guidelines, remains to be seen when the full report comes out. But it appears that's what happened. You had actually individuals in place to guide the students, and instead of actually guiding the students, there's reports of actually doing the work on behalf of the students. So it shows that not only were they not following how to get these students ready for academic eligibility, they actually did the work on behalf of the student. So it's very alarming evidence that comes out.
And you talked about the kind of advice that you provide to your clients in dealing with situations. I know you have extensive experience with education law, labor law, things like that. Obviously, they're going to have a team of folks advising them at this point. How would you advise Coach Boeheim and the football department? We can't overlook the fact that the football department is facing some penalties here. How would you advise the program going forward? How do they need to step up their game so this doesn't happen again?
Well, a lot of it has to do with who was put in place and to oversee the program. It's always good to have that liaison that knows the inside and outs of the NCAA guidelines. Once that person's in place and really takes a hard look at what the committee is doing here, then maybe going forward you'll be able to guide them a little bit better. Second of all, let's not forget there may be an opportunity for the school to appeal some of these sanctions. So once you get the full report, the other idea is, all right, maybe there's something that the committee overstepped. They went a little bit too far in some areas, or they didn't look at the correct evidence or all the evidence in determining what the sanctions and penalties should be. So there may be an opportunity for the schools, both programs, to appeal some of these sanctions. So take a hard look at what the committee said now. Put new rules in place that are recommended to ensure something like this doesn't happen. And the committee said they took a look at, well, Coach Boeheim picked the person that was supposed to oversee the program. Maybe get an independent person, something that doesn't have anything to do with either the football coach or the basketball coach, and make that person truly independent. That way there is no conflict, there is no intertwining of the two programs to oversee these NCAA guidelines. Something
for Chancellor Kent Severud at Syracuse to think about. Another thing, Greg, I wanted to touch on here, as far as we talk about, obviously it's going to be a tough situation when you knock off some scholarships, you take away some wins. You can't ignore the financial penalties here, though. One thing that really jumped out to me, the school must return all of its revenue that it garnered from the Big East basketball tournament the years 2011, 2012, and 2013. I mean, that's a stiff penalty, let's be honest.
Yeah, when you're finally hitting them in the pocketbook, I think that hurts a lot. But those kids that are there now, that's the argument that you're going to hear, is the kids that are there now are going to pay the penalty potentially going forward, the reduction in scholarships. But when you hit a university in the pocketbook, a lot of times that's other universities now look at that and say, well, hey, wait a minute, okay, now the NCAA is stepping in. That's a lot of revenue. They want to get into these tournaments not only to compete, but there is a huge pot at the end of the rainbow in the NCAA tournament. Whether it's the Big East tournament or the NCAA tournament, it's a revenue boost for the program.
It's interesting you say that, because an ACC foe for Syracuse, North Carolina, there have been some academic violation accusations as far as they are concerned too, and I think that's an interesting point you bring up. NCAA Infractions Committee might be sending a message here. This is what it's going to cost you if you do this.
Correct. Yeah, other schools now look at this as some type of precedent going forward. Not only how to set up the rules for making sure this academic integrity is in place, but hey, what if we fall out of favor with the NCAA and some type of sanctions come down? What are we looking at here? It seems to be when you hit somebody in the pocketbook, there is a deterrent attached to it. Certainly, everybody's going to take notice and see how much revenue is going to be lost, and hopefully that spurs them to action.
When you talk to clients about things like this, and obviously when you're penalized for wrongdoing, there's a stigma attached to it as well. How damaging is this to the reputation of the school, namely Coach Boeheim, who has been held in very high regard throughout many circles in the NCAA? Obviously, though, his reputation and the school's taking a hit here.
Yeah, that's the big thing. A lot of people maybe not realize that we're talking to today. Coach Boeheim's been through this before, and maybe 25, 30 years ago, but we haven't heard anything about that until these things start rumbling in the last couple of months. So the tarnish to the university, tarnish to the coach, a lot of times, I hate to say it, but if you continue to win in sports, that takes a lot of this away. But when you look at what was levied today compared to other programs, it's hard to get out from underneath this. It's going to take a while to be levied. These types of sanctions at any university is going to take a while to get out from underneath. you see that with other programs. It's not the death penalty that the SMUs of the world may have experienced in years past, but look at USC. They've rebuilded after being under the Pete Carroll era. They've been able to rebuild. They got a new coach in there. They turned the page. Syracuse is a long-standing university. It's been around for over, 200 years, the university itself. It's a page and a chapter of a long, long book, and I'm sure at the end of this, they'll turn the page, and in 10, 15 years, hopefully it's just a blip on the radar.
Yeah, we even have seen with the Penn State football team, they have also been able to resurrect that program as well. 5 years probation as well. What does that entail as far as restrictions there? Obviously, you can't run afoul of any of the things you were doing before.
Yeah, that's it. It's a huge thing because now, in our world, too, the legal world, whatever client you're trying to counsel, once you're on probation, any little thing you do, you miss a stop sign, you get pulled over for whatever the case may be, the university does one thing wrong, and you're on this 5-year probation, the NCAA has every right to come back in there and levy an additional fine. So going forward, you're on probation, you just can't do anything. You got to make sure your I's are dotted, T's are crossed across the board in every program. Because once one program comes under fire with the NCAA, everybody else is under the microscope at the university. So you really do have to make sure that the program going forward knows what they need to do. These internal guidelines that were missed have to be followed, and certainly somebody's got to be in there and making sure that those NCAA guidelines are met at every turn.
Absolutely. Well, Graig Zappia from the Tully Rinckey Law Firm, a lot of great insight right there. Thank you for joining us here as we continue our discussion of the sanctions levied against SU. Want to bring in Sports Director Mark Larson back with us here. And Mark, you heard what Graig had to say about all of this. Obviously, some big infractions here, and like you said, I think it was a good analogy. You talked about kind of a bunch of little things adding up, and Graig kind of confirming that as well. It just became unmistakable at some point that Coach Boeheim really, and the football program, albeit to a lesser degree, just was not doing what they needed to do to make sure that these student athletes were complying with NCAA regulations.
Yes, definitely. And, you know, as you read more into it, you know, I don't want anybody to think that I think any of this stuff is okay that happened. You know, I can call them little things, but because maybe they're not major. But as you read into it, there are some things about, you know, boosters giving players $8,000 in cash for volunteering at the YMCA. That's, you know, that's obviously that's not right. So that can't happen. So I don't know if you can call that a little thing. Maybe I spoke too soon on that. When you read into it, it talks about tutors doing work for players, you know, revising and maybe even creating work for them, which is not allowed. Obviously, they can help the player, but they can't do it for them. And other instances of that where people did work for the players, or they said that work is done, or that their internships, that they met a certain number of hours without actually having proof that they did that. So you can call them little things, and I did that, and I'm going to take it back because you know they're not major maybe, but they're certainly, you know, not minor things. There is some reaction coming in now from the Syracuse University Chancellor, Kent Severud, and I'm just reading it right now as it comes in to me. Part of what he says, he talks about how the university initially self-reported the potential violations, and he goes on to say that we believe the NCAA's investigation of Syracuse University has taken longer than any other investigation in NCAA history. The entire process, according to Chancellor Severud, has taken close to 8 years. By comparison, he says, the investigation into the fixing of the 1919 World Series took 2 months, and the 2007 investigation of steroid use in baseball took 21 months. This took 8 years, according to Chancellor Severud. He goes on to say that Syracuse University cooperated throughout the investigation, and we have worked hard with the NCAA during the last year to complete this matter. And then he says Syracuse University did not and does not agree with all the conclusions reached by the NCAA, including some of the findings and penalties, including in today's report. However, he says, we take the report and the issues it identifies very seriously particularly those that involve academic integrity and the overall well-being of student athletes. Again, this is Chancellor Severud's reaction to this. He says Syracuse University regrets and does not dispute that the following significant violations cited by the NCAA occurred. The first thing he says, he admits, is that the local YMCA, in 2004 and 2005, 2 men's basketball and 3 football student athletes received a combined total of $8,335 provided by a part-time local YMCA employee who qualifies as a booster. Okay? These monies were purportedly for work done at the YMCA, such as refereeing youth basketball games. However, these monies are prohibited extra benefits, and although these payments were isolated to one individual booster, they never should have occurred. Okay? So he said he admits the YMCA. Drug Education Deterrence Program. Although the NCAA does not require colleges and universities to have a testing program, if one is adopted, a school must follow its terms. The university reported that from 2001 to 2009, it at times failed to follow the written terms of the program with respect to student athletes who tested positive for use of marijuana. Although these failures largely were the result of an unnecessarily complicated testing policy and did not involve performance-enhancing drugs, they constitute an NCAA violation, which the university accepts. Okay? Academic integrity matters. And this is a long one here. I'm going to keep reading through this, and in the meantime, we're going to go back up and check in with Brian Mueller, who again is standing by outside the Mello Center as the team gets set to depart for its final game of the season tomorrow at noon. And again, they're getting all this information right now. It's going to be an interesting trip down to Carolina for them as they try and digest all this and then get ready to play North Carolina State tomorrow, which, by the way, is a very good team that's on the bubble that really needs to win tomorrow.
Yeah, Mark, it will be a long trip for the Orange as they head down to Carolina. As you mentioned, a few more players are starting to trickle in now in the past 15 or 20 minutes. We saw Michael Benege about half an hour ago. Since then, Tyler Roberson, Rakeem Christmas, Chris McCullough have all walked by, all keeping their heads down as they head into the Mello Center. And it's going to be no bones about it. It's going to be a pretty depressing season finale combined with the no postseason. Plus now this NCAA investigation coming out, and just kind of combing through this 94-page report. Obviously, we have a lot more reading to do, and as Mark mentioned, he's still reading through it right now as they're trying to sort out everything that is in this report. But looking at it, you really have to think the brunt of this is really going to come years from now, referring to those scholarship reductions. The report mentions that the scholarship reduction can start the year after next year as opposed to this year if they already promised scholarships to certain players. So you'd have to think over the next 4 years as the scholarship reduction ban is set into effect that you're really going to start to see it take a toll on this program with guys maybe wanting to come here but maybe looking elsewhere now instead because of this ban. Now, if there is maybe a silver lining in this, programs have recovered from postseason bans, from sanctions like this in the past. The most recent example and probably the most positive example of this is the UConn Huskies, who wound up winning the national title right after getting that postseason ban. And they've had a bit of a more down year this year. It doesn't look like they're going to be repeating this year. But still, they were able to come back pretty quickly from that, and you just have to hope that the Orange is going to be able to bounce back from this as quickly as they possibly can. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of effort this team has tomorrow, plus what kind of season it's going to be next year. We mentioned before that Jim Boeheim said on his Wednesday press conference that certain guys may not be coming back next year. He was very vague about it. We didn't know specifically what that meant, but you don't know if maybe Syracuse already, had an idea of what the sanctions were going to be from the NCAA, and maybe Boeheim has talked with some players, and maybe they've expressed some concerns about the future of the program. That's obviously pure speculation at this point, but he did say that there might be some guys not coming back next year. So probably in the next month or so, or maybe even sooner than that, we'll start to learn exactly what he meant by that. But for now, the Orange team is just focused on getting to Carolina and playing their season finale before they start worrying about anything for next year, Mark.
Didn't Mark just
a year, which it sounds like they're allowed to do. You'd think with the recruiting class kind of already in place for next year, if you start this next year, you're going to have to start kicking guys off the team, and I don't think they want to get to that point. So you're right, programs can recover, but this will be a significant recovery, and again, the cumulative effect could be really hard to take. Again, you're going from 13 scholarships down to 10 for a 4-year period. All right, thanks, Brian. We're going to check back in with you in just a bit. Reading further down into Chancellor Severud's reaction real quick, here's what Syracuse University proposed as far as penalties go. They proposed a 1-year postseason ban, which of course the NCAA has accepted. They proposed a 2-year term of probation. That's been ramped up to 5 years by the NCAA. Syracuse University proposed eliminating 1 scholarship for men's basketball just for next season. NCAA said no, 3 scholarships per year for 4 years. Syracuse University, again, proposed eliminating an off-campus recruiter, 1 off-campus recruiter for a 6-month period for next year. NCAA says no, for 2 years, you're taking 2 guys off the road. All right, and then Syracuse University also proposed vacating 24 men's basketball wins, 15 in 2004-05, and 9 in 2011-12. The NCAA said, no, we're going to take wins from 5 different seasons. And they also proposed giving back 11 football wins. The NCAA has said there will be vacation of football wins in the 3 seasons that Syracuse University proposed, so possibly that has also been accepted, but you're talking about more basketball wins than 24. You're talking about the 2 off-campus recruiters off the road for 2 years. And again, the scholarship reduction, not 1 for next year, but 3 for the next 4 years. So, again, and the really funny part, I find funny, the NCAA's report says because the violations came after the implementation of a new penalty structure, the panel used the former, more lenient penalty structure. So they say they're being lenient here. It doesn't sound that way to me. All right, back to Saul in Albany to talk more about what this all means and what the reaction from the Chancellor really means. Saul?
Yeah, Mark and Brian, thank you for that. Joined again by Graig Zappia, our legal expert from the Tully Rinckey law firm, and some really interesting comments. Mark, you touched on them a bit too. These comments from Chancellor Kent Syverud. One I really want to highlight. He kind of took a shot at the NCAA Infractions Committee here. One quote in particular, he said, quote, "We believe the NCAA's investigation of Syracuse University has taken longer than any other investigation in NCAA history. The entire process has taken close to 8 years and involved a review of conduct dating back to 2001. Now, we don't have it up there, but he draws a comparison here, and I find this very interesting. He says, by comparison, the investigation into the fixing of the 1919 World Series took 2 months. The investigation into the 2007 steroid use in baseball took 21 months. So, Graig, bringing it back to you, he took a shot here at the NCAA Infractions Committee, in my view, and in your view, basically saying, you spent 8 years on our school, and coupled with what Mark said, they suggested some penalties that they thought were appropriate. He can't agree with what came down today.
No, he's not pulling any punches. He basically says that you spend this much time around any program, you're going to turn something over, and obviously they did. They were looking for something. Maybe they started out in 1 year because the rumors had it that it was just a period of time that they were looking at regarding some improprieties with a couple of students. Well, you spend 8 years investigating a program, any D1 program for that matter, you're probably going to uncover some things that the general public does not want to hear about. And so that's what he says. He goes quite a ways in saying that the NCAA has amounts of resources and this is what they come up with. So certainly he's now on the offensive going back at the NCAA.
Yeah, he thinks that they shouldn't have devoted these resources and devoted that money to kind of getting to the bottom of what they did. He obviously disagrees with some of this. He went on further in his statement to say, quote, although the university recognizes the seriousness of these violations, it has acknowledged it respectfully disagrees with certain findings of the committee. Specifically, the university strongly disagrees that it failed to maintain institutional control over its athletics program, or that men's basketball head coach Jim Boeheim has taken actions that justify a finding that he was responsible for the rules violations. University is considering whether it will appeal. Like you said, Greg, that would be an option to them. They are considering whether they will appeal certain portions of the decision. Coach Boeheim may choose to appeal the portions of the decision that impact him personally. And let's get to that, because some word is starting to trickle out now that specifically to Coach Jim Boeheim, this could add up with all the wins vacated over the course of a number of years, not including the 2003 championship season, but including all those other years. He could lose 108 wins. The significance of that, we have talked about it briefly here, but let's dive deeper into that. Coach Boeheim sitting at 966 wins right now. If you knock off 108, that takes him down to 858 victories. And then if you do the math further, right now he is second on the all-time wins list. That will take him down to 6th. So clearly, the NCAA Infractions Committee, not only are they coming down on the program itself, but Coach Boeheim in a big way.
Yeah, we talked about the image, the tarnished image now that going forward, and it's hitting Coach Boeheim. What do you play the game for? You play to win. And he was out there for the last, I mean, he's been at Syracuse since 1960-something, 50 years. And now his legacy is taking a major hit, 100 out of almost 1,000 wins. So that's 10% of his wins that are going down the tubes because of what's going on here. Now, I think we were talking in the break there that that's one major step, because I don't think the NCAA's history has ever done something like that. So certainly now you got the school issues that they're going to have to deal with. Coach Boeheim has the full support of the university to do whatever he wants to do as far as his own personal appeal. And we'll see. I know Coach Boeheim doesn't take things sitting down for sure. And I bet you he'll come out swinging. But then on the other hand, you look at it, he was always thinking forward to turning the program over to Coach Hopkins. Now, does that mean he wants to go out on this note? Seeing what he's done over the last 50 years, I don't think he wants to have the NCAA have the last word in it. So there's going to be some work to do on the university's end and the coaches' end to try to maneuver here appeal-wise, taking on these sanctions and seeing what they can do. But that's a major blow to Coach Boeheim's coaching record, not to mention his personal integrity. Now,
obviously, keeping it focused here on Coach Boeheim, the one important thing I also take away from the Chancellor's comments here is Coach Boeheim, at least on the surface and from whatever we can see, he does appear to have the support of his chancellor. That might not be universal throughout the university's board, but as far as the chancellor goes, it seems like he supports his head coach. Yeah, you got to have a united front in these types of circumstances. If there's any fractures involved, you see it in politics. You have the politician's wife, if there's ever a scandal, stand right next to him. They stand together. Coach is an institution in and of its own, and he's embraced that community from day one. He's a local guy in their respect. I grew up Wayne County, so right next door to where the university is, and he's been able to foster a winning attitude, a good something that the university has embraced. So this is no surprise that the university stands behind him and does this. He's a character. He's a good coach, but certainly when it comes down to it, the report makes mention of institutional control. He didn't have institutional control. Whenever that's referenced, those are buzzwords in this type of community when sanctions are talked about, when NCAA is involved in investigations that you don't want to hear as a coach, as a program, football or basketball. It just there's going to be some work to do, but hopefully he'll be able to muster an appeal. And obviously we're seeing there on your screen for our viewers, Coach Boeheim suspended for the first 9 ACC tournament games next year. But obviously the bigger penalty, it looks like, specifically to Coach Boeheim, aside from recruiting restrictions, it looks like 108 victories will be vacated from his coaching record, taking him from 966 wins, the second winningest coach all-time in NCAA history, all the way down to 858 wins, 6th all-time. So knocking him down 4 pegs. Want to get back real quick to what the Chancellor's statement had to say He kind of wrapped up here saying some may not agree with Syracuse University's positions on these important issues. However, we hope everyone will agree, and he kind of alluded to it, and he says it directly right here, that 8 years is too long for an investigation into these matters. It should have been more expeditious and less costly process. That would have been beneficial to student athletes, public confidence in the NCAA enforcement process, and major intercollegiate athletics in general. Greg, obviously this is an unhappy chancellor today. There's no mistaking that.
No, not at all. And another thing that he mentions, not only by saying, hey, you've taken way too long, you've uncovered a lot of different things. The one good thing he does too is point out in his statement, okay, fine, we disagree, but we're going to change. And immediately in his statement he goes through, this is what we're going to do. And there's several bullet points about restructuring what's been there. So it's not an omission, but it's an admission. He knows that there was issues in the past, but we're going to make sure we're going to do everything we possibly can moving forward, which is somebody that's a CEO of a company, in this case the chancellor of the university, needs to get out in front of it and say, all right, fine, we have issues now, but this is never going to happen. He says it. These mistakes must never happen again. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to restructure the program as it stands. We're going to make sure that there's better drug education and deterrence programs available for student athletes. So getting out in front of it, telling the general public, the university itself, letting everybody know in the community that, hey, all right, fine, this happened in the past, we're going to be better in the future, and that now starts to turn the public perception in his favor. You admit your mistakes, you move on in any scenario, especially in this scenario where it is a big institution in central New York. All eyes are on Syracuse across the nation now. So we got to respond. He comes out swinging at the NCAA and tells everybody, we're going to make amends.
Yep, Attorney Graig Zappia here providing us his insight from the Tully Rinckey law firm. Want to send it back over to Mark Larson. It is 1 o'clock. We're getting close to that press conference that's going to be held by the NCAA Infractions Committee. They're going to break down what's in this report. So we're going to send it back over to Mark Larson in the sports studio.
All right, thanks, guys. Yes, we are under the impression the NCAA teleconference has begun. This is just all on the phone, so we're going to try and bring that to you to see if there's any more information out there. But the 108 wins, I think, is a huge deal. It's the largest number of vacated victories in the history of NCAA investigations, it says, but Joe Paterno was also forced to vacate 111 wins by the NCAA down at Penn State when that scandal broke. Those wins were later reinstated to Joe Paterno, so it could be a thing where they take 108 wins away from Coach Boeheim, and a year or two from now they add him back on. So it kind of puts everybody in a weird state of limbo. Like, what do you do? He's at 966 now. So 34 wins, let's say next year or the year after, if Coach Boeheim is still coaching with us, he reaches 1,000. You can't celebrate it because according to the NCAA, he'd only have 858 plus 34, 892. So, yeah, it's just a strange situation. And again, we'll see if Coach Boeheim decides to appeal, and apparently the university will have his back should he decide to do that. All right, let's listen in now. The NCAA teleconference on this report is underway.
And an analysis section. And so we want everyone to know the report speaks for itself, and most of your questions can be answered by simply reading the report. It's important to note at the outset that there were few facts in dispute, and most of the allegations were also not disputed, with some exception, obviously. This case is characterized as level 1, meaning it involves a severe breach of conduct. That is to say, there were several violations that seriously undermine or threaten the integrity of the collegiate model for athletics. Because the case had some violations that occurred prior to the recent penalty reform, the institution was entitled to application of the less severe penalty structure. The case spans a considerable length of time and primarily involves the sport of men's basketball. Key findings in the case include impermissible payments to student athletes by a booster involved with AAU basketball from an AAU bank account, ongoing failure to adhere to the university's written drug testing policies, and multiple episodes of academic misconduct and academic fraud committed by men's basketball staff members, as well as the provision of impermissible academic extra benefits, in most instances designed to ensure that the student athletes remained eligible to compete for the basketball team. In addition, the panel concluded that the head men's basketball coach failed to promote an atmosphere of compliance and failed to monitor the activities of the individuals in his program. Under Bylaw 11-121, a head coach is presumed to be aware of the violations and responsible for the violations committed by those he supervises. Finally, the committee found that over the course of a 10-year period, the institution failed to exercise control and monitor the conduct and administration of its athletics program. We were fortunate to have on the panel Dr. Michael Adams, President Emeritus from the University of Georgia, as well as Dr. Thomas Hill, Vice President for Academic Services from Iowa State University, and Joel Maturi. Each brought decades of experience on campus and a solid perspective on the issues in this case, which really go to the core values of the NCAA and higher education. As is outlined in more detail in the report, the penalties include 5 years of probation from March 6, 2015 through March 5, 2020, vacation of all wins in which ineligible men's basketball student athletes played in 2004-5, 5-6, 6-7, 10-11, and 11-12, and ineligible football students played in 04 through 06 and 07. The public decision contains additional details about the vacation of wins. There are fines, including a requirement that the university return to the NCAA all funds it received from its appearances in the 2011, 12, and 13 NCAA men's basketball tournament, a suspension of the head basketball coach from the first 9 conference games of 2015-16, a reduction of men's basketball scholarships by 3 in each of the following years, 15-16, 16-17, 17-18, and 18-19, reduction in the number of permissible off-campus recruiters from 4 to 2 during the period June 1, 2015 through May 31, 2017. And then the committee and the panel also noted and accepted the school's self-imposed postseason ban for the 2014-15 season. One more point to share. The investigations in this case went on for an extreme and excessive period of time. I think there's a timeline actually available for those who want to see it. And the panel noted this fact, and hopefully this case will trigger a process reform to require more timely resolution of cases in the future. That concludes my comments, and I would again encourage those interested to carefully read the entire report, as most of the answers to your questions are contained in it. Emily, I guess I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Burton. Cynthia, can you please explain how reporters can indicate they would like to ask a question?
Certainly, and ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to ask a question, please press star followed by 1 on your touch-tone phone. You will hear a tone indicating that you have been placed in queue, and you may remove yourself from queue by pressing the pound key. If you are using a speakerphone, please pick up your handset before pressing the numbers. And once again, for any questions or comments, press star and then 1. And our first question will come from the line of Dennis Dodd with CBSSports.com. Your line is open.
Thank you. I want to make sure you guys can hear me. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Dennis.
Okay. Britton, could you speak to the Syracuse AD's assertion, I guess at the hearing, that the school's own written drug policy was, quote, too confusing, close quote, to follow? And was that a reason Syracuse challenged some of the drug test allegations later on? And I have a follow-up, if you don't mind.
Well, relative to drug testing, as you know, there's no requirement that institutions have a drug testing policy. But if they do, they are required to follow it. And in this case, there was a policy, written policy that required action when student-athletes test positive, and numerous student-athletes tested positive on numerous occasions without being withheld from competition. So the written policy was simply not followed. And I think the panel felt like that if there is a written policy, the very purpose of a written policy is to create some level of clarity.
Right. And I have a follow-up as well. I understand. I think you used the old penalty structure. I think you mentioned that in this case. Mm-hmm. But in the new structure, in this case, would the head coach have been eligible for that 1-year suspension that the coaches are being held to in the new structure?
Yeah, the answer is I believe so. We're 18 months into the new reformed processes, and for the most part, they seem to be working. The penalties in the new system are very severe, and I think that was intended by the NCAA Board of Directors when they adopted it. An important consideration is when facts in a case predate the reform, the institution's not subject to the more severe penalties. But had that not been the case, this is a level 1 case, serious breach, aggravated circumstances, so you'd be looking at, a minimum of 6 years probation, minimum of 2 years postseason ban, a minimum of 25% scholarship cuts, which could go much more, and I think it's a minimum of 50% of a season in terms of suspension. So I think everyone needs to just be noting that we're moving into kind of a new place relative to the severity of penalties going forward.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Pat Ford with Yahoo Sports. Your line is open.
Hi, Britton. I was just wondering, in glancing at the report, you said that the drug testing policy was failed to be adhered to starting in 2001. There's no games vacated until 2004-05. Can you explain why games were not vacated earlier than that?
I mean, there wasn't any allegation in the case at all that there was ineligibility prior to, I think, 2004. In fact, I think even there was a statute of limitations agreement between the staff and the university that triggered off of May 2003.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Andy Katz with ESPN. Your line is open.
Thank you. Britton, I want to get to the self-imposed postseason ban that Syracuse used, and obviously schools have tried this in the past, even one in your conference, Southern Miss, has done it already for this season. What is the committee's reaction when they get word that there is a self-imposed ban prior to the announcement of any sanctions, and then as a dovetail follow-up to that, what is your personal reaction as to how necessary that is to penalize mid-year to the students that are not even involved in the case, rather than starting it out fresh the following fall, as all these penalties are in terms of the suspension for Boeheim and all that kind of stuff? That all starts next year. If you could answer both of those, please.
Yeah. If an institution, through its responsibility to investigate violations on their campus, wants to self-impose a penalty, there's nothing to prevent that from happening. And so, as you know, in previous cases, even in the Miami case, it was a long, protracted investigation and case. I mean, there were 2 postseason bans self-imposed in Miami on the football program. It becomes more problematic when it's in the middle of football season or the middle of basketball season, and it also obviously becomes more problematic post-hearing. But ultimately, it's the university's call if they want to do that.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Brian Sharp with Democrat and Chronicle. Your line is open.
Yes, in the report it says that the institution identified 24 basketball victories, 11 football victories, but if I'm reading this correctly, it sounds like the panel expected that there would be more. and it's directed them to come back to the report in 45 days. Can you give any indication, either precisely how many victories for both that you're expecting to be vacated, or at least some indication on how much you expect those to increase, where we expect to land?
I think we just want to make sure we get it right, and I think it's more or less a clerical matter that the university and the staff have to get together and make sure the math is done correctly, up or down.
We have a question from the line of Paul Newberry with Associated Press. Your line is open.
Thank you. Just to clarify again, you said that that this certainly the coach would have been probably facing at least a half-season ban under the new guidelines. And was the 9-game? I'm not clear on the old rules. Is that the maximum that he could get under the standard?
In the current system, there's really aren't brackets around it. In the new system going forward, there are more prescribed penalties that in cases that are level 1 severe and with aggravation are, the panel will be required to impose. Going forward, it's going to be more prescribed than it is right now.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Chris Carlson with Syracuse Post-Standard. Your line is open.
Britton, the university has kind of come out and disputed Jim Boeheim's responsibility for the violations. How do you factually support the contention that he's, personally responsible for many of them?
Well, as I said earlier, the rule is pretty clear that a head coach has a duty to monitor the activities of those in the program, and is also presumed to be accountable for their violations. And the presumption in the case was not effectively rebutted at all. In fact, the coach hired the director of basketball operations to improve the academic performance of the players, and he did it by logging into their email accounts, exchanging communication with professors about what the student needs to do, and then in concert with the basketball receptionist, assisted in the preparation of coursework for the players. So in this case, the panel felt the head coach should be responsible for the people who report directly to him, most certainly.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Dana O'Neill with ESPN.com. Your line is open.
Britton, that was almost essentially my question, because I just wanted to clarify. You said that most of the allegations were not disputed, but in the report it also says that Jim Boeheim did, in fact, dispute that he should be held accountable, correct?
Yeah, that's an exception. There was the controversy over that, as well as whether the institution should be held accountable for a lack of institutional control.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is a follow-up from Andy Katz with ESPN. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Britton, I just want to make clear, what kind of effect did Syracuse's postseason ban have on the penalties?
We noted it and accepted it. That's it.
What were the chances, if I can follow up real quickly, had they not done that you would have imposed a postseason ban for next season?
I don't want to speculate about that, Andy.
Thank you. Our next question comes from a follow-up from Pat Ford with Yahoo Sports. Please go ahead.
Britton, you said that the statute of limitations was agreement reached between staff and university for May 2003. What constitutes staff? Is that NCAA enforcement staff or Committee on Infractions? Who is the staff in question?
I asked that question in an email this morning, and so because I thought it might be asked on this call, and so the enforcement staff in its reply indicated that the parties agreed the pertinent date is May 4, 2003.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Bill Carey with Time Warner Cable. Your line is open.
Yes, sir. The question is, again, related to Coach Boeheim. He is the one name that stretches throughout this investigation. Just how important should the NCAA treat the matter of coaches not making sure that the rules are being followed?
I mean, it's very serious. It's a rule that's been around for a while that holds head coaches responsible in all sports for the violations that take place in their program. And it's not enough to say I thought they knew the rules and thought they were following the rules. There's a higher level of responsibility that attaches to the head coach because ultimately he or she is responsible.
Thank you. We have a follow-up from the line of Ryan Sharp with Democrat and Chronicle. Your line is open.
I just want to follow up on one of your opening remarks. You talked about I think you said, extreme and excessive period of the investigation and hope that it triggers some resolution or reforms to address these matters more timely. Can you speak a little bit more to that? How, I guess, what contributed to the extreme and excessive period and how you could see that being rectified going forward?
Sure. I'll comment a little bit. I mean, from my perspective, having kind of been on the membership side of the NCAA for quite a while, I think it's really harmful for these processes to go on too long. I think the reputation of the university gets unnecessarily put out there in the public pre-hearing, and so I'm a big advocate for figuring out a way to expedite these things and move them along and do it in a way that's more thoughtful from a timing perspective. In this case, I think, the NCAA enforcement staff has to take some responsibility here. They ultimately, were managing an investigation on their side. I think the processing of some of the academic misconduct issues on campus obviously added to the delay. Certainly they weren't expedited, and it took some time. And even in the last couple of months, I mean, issues were being appealed to the NCAA governance groups on interpretive issues. And so, the bottom line is it's unacceptable, I think, for our membership to have cases that drag on this long.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Tim Ruffinen with Time Warner News. Please go ahead.
Mr. Banowski, I was calling in regards to how many wins are being docked from Coach Boeheim. Do you guys have a number on that?
We've encouraged the staff of the NCAA and the staff of the university to get together and make sure they do the math well. So I really don't have a number right now.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Jake New with Inside Higher Ed. Your line is open.
Thanks. So I guess what I'm asking is, there's been sort of this broader effort, it seems, to crack down on academic fraud. We keep hearing some numbers being thrown out regarding to how many schools are being investigated. And you mentioned this case going kind of to the core value of the NCAA. So I'm wondering, how do you and the NCAA kind of view this in relation to this broader effort, and is that going anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, one of the elements of this case was NCAA decision to defer to institutions because the academy is really a better place to have matters of academic fraud resolved, and so that certainly took place in this case. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that you can't have violations in terms of providing academic extra benefits and support that go clearly beyond what the other students on campus get. So I think step one is to be deferential to the university systems and processes. But ultimately, if you have a situation where the desire to achieve success on the basketball court overrides academic integrity, it really demonstrated clearly misplaced priorities. And so, that's where the NCAA processes come in.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of John Solomon with CBSSports.com. Your line is open.
Hey, Britton, that was sort of my question as well about the academic integrity determination. But I know there's been some efforts to sort of rewrite what the NCAA can do in terms of academic fraud issues. Have committee members, have they talked about sort of where you all may stand on this moving forward?
The committee is one place for that conversation, but really it's a conversation for the broader membership in all of higher education. I mean, academic misconduct is not something that's isolated to student athletes. and sports. It's across the board. And so I think you'll see over the course of the next several months and even longer a more focused dialogue about where the lines are drawn here and what expectations are placed on the NCAA enforcement program to pursue these matters.
Thank you. Our final question comes from the line of Paul Newberry with the Associated Press. Your line is open.
Yeah, just to follow up to my earlier question regarding the suspension for Coach Boeheim, why did the committee settle on 9 games, and was there any thought of a longer suspension?
The committee discussed it, an appropriate penalty, and did some review of prior cases in terms of the discussion, but ultimately just felt like 9 games was the right place. It actually represents 50% of the conference season. I think the conference season is an 18-game season, and the group just felt like that was the right place to be.
Thank you. And speakers, I'd like to turn it back over to you for any closing comments.
I don't have any.
Thank you again for joining us today. This concludes our comments.
All right, so there you have it. Britton Banowski, the Chief Hearing Officer, Commissioner of Conference USA, by the way, and also a member of the Committee on Infractions, speaking to the release. It came out about noon, so about an hour and a half ago, the NCAA finally released the results of its investigation, which lasted 4 months. And even the NCAA admits it lasted way too long. 4 months in their eyes, 8 years in the eyes of Syracuse University. Some penalties being leveled against the Orange basketball and football programs, but the most severe penalties concerning men's basketball. And just to recap a little bit for you what those penalties include. The Orange are on 5 years of probation. Again, this is pending any appeal from SU, but a 5-year period of probation for the SU basketball team starting now and extending until 2020. It also includes a suspension for head coach Jim Boeheim for the first half of the ACC season next year. 9 games for Coach Boeheim. He'll be suspended next season. A 4-year reduction of men's basketball scholarships, and that is the big one. 3 scholarships per year, so that's a 12 scholarship reduction over a 4-year period. The Orange have the option of starting that in 2016-17 because obviously they have their recruits in place already for next year, so the NCAA says they can start that next year if they choose to do so. It also includes the vacation of wins for both football and basketball. For football, they're talking about all 11 wins from 2004 to 2007. That's Coach P's last year, 2004-05, when they won 6 games, and the first 2 years of the G-Rob era when they won 1 game and 4 games. So 11 wins for football, but basketball wins, that could be a significant number. They're talking about 5 seasons, it says, during which ineligible players competed. So those games will be vacated, will be given back. And the number that's being thrown out there right now is 108, which would bring Coach Boeheim from 966 back down to 858. 108. But they won 132 games in those 5 years. 3 wins without Fab Melo. So you take those 3 wins away from that last year when they won 34 down to 31. So they won 132 games during those years. So I don't know where the number 108 is coming from. The NCAA says it does not have a number of wins being vacated yet. So we shall see if that number is accurate or if it's possibly even more than 108 wins docking from Coach Boeheim. It also includes recruiting restrictions for 2 years. Instead of having 4 guys on the road recruiting, the Orange can only have 2 off-campus recruiters for basketball for the next 2 years. So some pretty serious penalties. The NCAA calls this a level 1 severe breach of conduct, a violation that seriously undermine or threaten the integrity of the NCAA collegiate model as set forth in their constitution and bylaws. So despite what I said earlier, these are not, in the eyes of the NCAA, minor violations. This is a severe breach of conduct. You're talking about a 10-year period, which starts before the championship season and ends in 2011-12. Fortunately, the championship is not being affected by this, so Syracuse can hang on to that. But a lot of wins going to be coming off Coach Boeheim's record, and a lot of scholarship reductions for this. Now let's throw it up to the Mello Center, where Brian Mueller has been standing by for us. The team, as far as we know, has not left yet, but maybe that's changed since last time we talked to you, Brian. They're trying to get down to NC State for their final game tomorrow amidst all of this.
Well, Mark, unless the team has a super secret getaway spot, they have not left the Mello Center yet. We've been here the entire time for the last hour and a half. We've seen players come in, and we have not seen any players come out yet. And we're still waiting for them to actually take off for North Carolina, so we'll keep you posted on that. But no players have come in or out in the past half hour or so. One interesting thing throughout all this that I think we should discuss now is what this does for Jim Boeheim's future. Mark, I know you touched on it earlier. Jim Boeheim's a very proud guy. He's not going to want his career to end with an NCAA investigation and basically that potentially forcing him out. But if you look at what is going to happen to this team in the next 3 or 4 years, possibly over the next 5 years, depending on when that scholarship reduction takes into place, Boeheim's going to be coaching this team with one arm tied behind his back with fewer scholarships at his disposal. He's in his 70s. He's had obviously a great career, been here a long time. Is he going to want to stick through the next 3 or 4 years that might be tough for this program with not having as many scholarships to offer players? I think that's something that's going to be very interesting to see, and who knows what's going to happen with that. But as we talked about before, Boeheim's a very proud guy. He's not going to be happy about this wins reduction, and you heard the SU chancellor say that he will support Jim Boeheim if he wants to appeal any personal sanctions that were against him, not of the program, but personal sanctions on Jim Boeheim. So we'll have to see what this does for Jim Boeheim's future. Right now, I would have to think, just knowing how he handles these things, that he's not going to want to step down, retire, amidst all this. He's going to want to show the NCAA that he can overcome this and build this program and keep it at a championship level throughout all of this. But that'll be something that's certainly very interesting to see. But, it's getting into the early afternoon now. The Oranges game at NC State is at noon tomorrow, Saturday, so you'd have to think that they're going to be leaving the Mello Center pretty soon to catch a charter plane down to Raleigh. So, Mark, will certainly keep you posted as we're live out here waiting for the team to leave for the airport.
All right, Brian, very good. Thanks very much for that. And, yeah, let us know if you hear anything more up there. And we've got Eric Columbia, by the way, down in Raleigh covering the game this weekend. So we expect to hear from Eric later this evening. He'll certainly be with us for Sports Night and be covering the game tomorrow. And it will be interesting to hear from the players post-game tomorrow, their reaction to all of this that is coming out here this afternoon. I'm sure it's going to be a long day and a long night for them as they try and digest all of this. And you talk about Coach Boeheim being a proud guy, and if we remember back about a month ago, their first game after Syracuse announced its self-imposed ban, Coach Boeheim was asked post-game at the Pittsburgh game what he would say to people who maybe think he hasn't run a clean program. And Coach Boeheim said very poignantly that I don't give an expletive what those people think. He's proud of what he's done here. So it leads me to believe that Coach is going to ride this out. He's not going to hightail it out of here. He's going to ride this out, may even appeal and try to get a reduction in the number of vacated wins. But Coach, I see him riding this out and making sure that when he leaves Syracuse, his legacy is not tarnished. He's done a lot of great things here, obviously, in 39 seasons as the head coach and going back almost a half century as a player and assistant coach. And I don't think Coach Boeheim is going to leave here until he knows that his legacy is cemented in a positive way, despite all of this that now is going to be said about his program, not only around here, but around the country. You go on to ESPN.com, and guess what? It's going to be front page news all day today. All right, speaking of news, let's check in again with Solomon Syed and get some more reaction. I understand he still has his legal representative there with him, not his, but anyway, our legal analyst. Sal, take it away.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. Joined here by Graig Zappia from the Tully Rinckey law firm. And we were listening in on that teleconference with Britton Banowski. He's the commissioner of Conference USA, the chief hearing officer for the NCAA Infractions Committee. One of the things that we thought was really interesting about all this is he called this a level 1 severe breach. Mark referred to that as well, but that's under the new standards, and not trying to make it too confusing for the viewers out there, but there's a new set of standards in place, and he kind of referenced the fact that a lot of these infractions took place before those new standards came into being, and the penalties actually could have been harsher. We kind of went through the list here. They could have been looking at 6 years probation under the new standards, 2 years postseason ban instead of the 1 self-inflicted postseason ban, and then a minimum of a half-season suspension for Coach Boeheim. So they were looking at stiffer penalties under the new rules, but the committee said a lot of these infractions happened before those new rules were in place. So Syracuse kind of skating by those new set of standards in a sense.
Yeah, so maybe the NCAA is saying, you caught a break. You caught a break here. These are some serious violations. Under the new rules, we could have gone much further. So kind of unintentionally going back what the chancellor of Syracuse had mentioned, that Jesus is excessive, what's going on here. The NCAA in their committee, Mr. Banowski says, no, well, it could have been much worse under the new standards. They're pretty harsh either way, but certainly compared to what they could have been, maybe it is a little bit of a break here.
Now, a question for you. You talked about the appeals process going forward. Obviously, questions about how many wins are going to be vacated. Tim Ruffinen, part of our team here, asked that question during the teleconference. They aren't sure. They want Syracuse to kind of pour through their records and identify, and at this point, they have every incentive to be honest, how many games were played by ineligible players, then get back to the committee and let them know this is the amount of games. There you're seeing on your screen kind of the sanctions there, kind of the list of them run down. There's plenty of them, talking specifically about the number of games here. They want them to go and count them all up, then go back to the committee and say these how many were played. Okay, Coach Boeheim, this is how many fewer games are going to be attached to your record here. But getting to the appeals process and how Coach Boeheim might be able to hang on to more of those wins, where do we go from here?
Yeah, the school and Coach Boeheim now are in the process of deciding whether or not they want to appeal. So the clock starts ticking on the timelines of processing that appeal. You get 15 days to decide, all right, are we going to do something? Then you notify the NCAA. Simply written letter, hey, we're going to appeal. And then from that point, you have 30 days to provide a written report to the NCAA why some of these sanctions should be vacated. Should there be less wins? Should there be more scholarships kept by the school going forward? So now the opportunity, the ball is in Syracuse court to tell the NCAA what we want to do from here on out. The key as far as the appeals process go, whether it's dealing with the NCAA or in a regular court of law, is the original fact finder has such deference. The NCAA has provided the reports, 94 pages long, whatever it is. They're given due deference. Only if there's been some serious flaws in the process. You think of all the major cases that we've seen. The investigation was flawed in some way. Syracuse now has to bring that to the attention of the NCAA and say, hey, listen, the process was flawed, here's why. Or you have to compare yourself to another case in the past and say the NCAA went too far. It's interesting because it's an individual case on its own. Comparing it to USC, comparing it to things that have gone on at UConn, whatever the case may be, it's interesting to try to make that case and say, hey, you're too excessive, because it's easy for the NCAA to come back and say, no, we disagree, and that's it. You're appealing directly to them. Maybe they reduce it a little bit on a few minor points, like you said with Coach Paterno at Penn State. Maybe they do the right thing and restore it because that's what they do after the appeals process. They handed it back. Nothing changes as far as the charges are concerned, or nothing changes as far as the misconduct is concerned at Penn State or at Syracuse, but maybe they do the right thing and restore those wins back to Coach Boeheim.
What do you think is their strongest argument in this appeal? Obviously, you just mentioned the fact that they might try to go from the standpoint of, we think that the infractions committee kind of did this wrong or that wrong in the investigation. You already notice that there's a dispute over the time frame. The infractions committee says this was a 4-month-long investigation. Syracuse says, no, this was an 8-year-long investigation. What do you think is their strongest argument? Obviously, that first one there you already pointed out, they're going to say, hey, there were some misdeeds done on the NCAA's behalf during this investigation.
Right. I hate to give the typical attorney answer and say you got to do everything you possibly can at this point. You're under the gun. You're talking about the integrity of the university, some substantial fines that have been levied. So you got to come out with everything you can. You have to impugn the process of the NCAA. Find something, whatever you can hang your hat on, and go with it. If you're going to come out and try to overturn these major sanctions, you really got to do everything. Start with the process and say, you know, you were flawed in the investigation. There was bias involved. There was conflicts involved. Whatever you possibly can, attack the process as far as the appeal is concerned. And then you have to compare yourself to those other schools out there. If you can find something, we use case precedent to show, listen, we did the exact same thing as this other university in the United States, and yet you're coming down on us much more significantly. Using that to your advantage as far as defending the university is going to bode well. Significantly, when brought up, what went on at Penn State, Coach Paterno lost 111 wins. Obviously, football programs play a lot less, but comparing it to Syracuse and the vacation potentially of 108 wins, looking at the conduct in those cases, you're talking academic integrity and something much more criminal. So there is an aspect of potential excessiveness that Syracuse could use to their advantage in saying, look what you did to USC, look what you did to Penn State, and now look what you've done to us, and trying to make that plea as best you can.
You hate to be cynical about it, but does it essentially break down into a, lack of a better term, a negotiation stance where you say, hey, you know, you put this out, looks good as far as the infractions committee is concerned, coming down hard on the university, but can there be a little give and take here?
Yeah, a lot of times when you're dealing with these types of negotiations, that's what it is at this point. As far as the NCAA and the university are concerned, Syracuse put out their first best offer. Hey, we'll do this, that, and the other thing. A couple of scholarships as opposed to 3, or 1 scholarship instead of opposed to 3. 1 postseason ban instead of what they could have done is do 2 or more. And then the NCAA came back and said, no, you didn't do good enough. Here's our counteroffer. Now the ball's back in Syracuse's court. Hopefully, maybe, as Syracuse fans might want to expect, maybe this isn't the NCAA's last go-round. Maybe they do say, okay, you're right, we do see some flaws that you brought out to our attention. We're going to reduce these things here and there. Usually, the success rate as far as these appeals are concerned, if you're a baseball player, it's great. You're batting 34%, 340 as far as these appeals are concerned. There's hundreds of them over the course of the last 40, 50 years. However, the converse of that, the 66% of those appeals fail. So it's an uphill battle whenever you get to the appeal stage. But hopefully there's a way out if you're a Syracuse fan to turn the page, reduce some of those scholarships. That's the biggest hurt. The money is an issue too. And then obviously if you're a fan of Coach Boeheim, trying to get those wins restored as well. But I manage expectations with my clients, and trying to manage Syracuse fans' expectations, it's an uphill battle. Once this report is levied, unless there's a significant flaw in the process, unless you can show that you're being treated excessively as compared to some other similar programs, it's going to be very difficult to overturn everything.
And I'm sure there are some fans out there right now who are saying, and we heard some of this right when it came down. We sent our reporters to the SU campus, and a lot of the fans were saying, you know, they were kind of looking at the obvious picture here this year, Syracuse basketball down this year. So a lot of fans took the stance that, hey, if you're going to pick a year to not be in the postseason, this might be it. However, when you start to look at the scholarships that are being taken away, there might be a situation where the NCAA is saying, okay, well, you're only banned for 1 year from NCAA competition, but we're taking away 3 scholarships. That could effectively amount to a postseason ban. It's going to be very hard for this team to reach the postseason with the type of players they'll be recruiting with those scholarship restrictions.
Right. You're already talking, there's recruits out there that haven't signed their letters of intent to come to Syracuse. Well, if they were hesitant and didn't sign on the dotted line, I guess there's some recruits actually in the Rochester area that are now looking at, well, there may not be a scholarship for me. Even if you delay it like the NCAA allows you to do for 1 extra season, don't impose those scholarships, you still may be out of luck. And we can joke about Coach Boeheim doesn't play the bench anyways. You know, there's only a 6 or 7 man rotation. Right. But trying to get those recruits in, the new freshmen, the new sophomores that are rising up, to try to take the place of those graduating seniors or those that go off to the NBA. It's very difficult. That's the biggest one that's going to hurt. And the NCAA is very reluctant to do something like that. Maybe they stagger it. Maybe they maybe spread it out over time. There's ways to negotiate that as well. Say, hey, why not? If it's 3 per year, can we stagger it a little bit here? But I don't even know if that's a possibility.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot to digest here. We've tried to break it down as best we can for our viewers out there. Some complicated stuff, obviously severe sanctions here. Graig Zappia from the Tully Rinckey law firm, thanks for your insight with all of this.
My pleasure. Thanks.
All right, taking it from Graig, now back over to Mark Larson in the sports studio. And Mark, we're seeing maybe the trickle down already starting to take effect. I've seen a couple tweets on Twitter that Thomas Bryant has a trip to Indiana scheduled, and some speculation that SU is already out of the running now with this announcement today. So maybe the first domino to fall with all these sanctions.
And that would be a significant domino to fall. Solomon, thank you very much. Yeah, Thomas Bryant, kind of the real gem of next year's recruiting class if the Orange can land him, but they were already one scholarship heavy, meaning they had one too many committed for next year, so they're going to have to free one up if they wanted to get him. And now, with the NCAA taking away 3 more, unless Syracuse delays that, it certainly doesn't look good for him coming to Syracuse next season. Let's just recap for you quickly. We've been on the air with you talking about this since noon when the NCAA released the results of its investigation into the Syracuse athletics program for a series of violations which include academic misconduct, extra benefits, failure to follow its own drug testing policy, and impermissible booster activity. And here are the sanctions that the NCAA is proposing or recommending to levy against Syracuse, again pending any appeal, which apparently the Orange have 2 weeks to do. A 5-year probationary period for both the men's basketball program and the Syracuse football program. A 4-year reduction in scholarships for the men's basketball program, 3 per year for a 4-year period. So that's a total of 12 scholarships they're taking away. And again, when you only have 13 scholarships per year, you're going down to 10 now for a 4-year period. So a significant reduction of scholarships available now. A 9-game ACC conference ban for Coach Boeheim. So next season, the Syracuse coach will miss the first half of the conference season on suspension, again, if this is all upheld. A vacation of wins for football and basketball. For football, they're talking about a 3-year period from 2004 to 2007, which covers Coach Pasqualoni's last year and Coach Robinson's first 2 years. 11 total wins for football. For basketball, a much more significant number. Syracuse University proposed a 24-game vacation, but the NCAA says, no, we're going to take wins from 5 different seasons in which ineligible players competed. And if you add up the wins for the 5 seasons they're talking about, you're talking about 132 possible wins that will be vacated. There were 3 wins in there that were played without Fab Melo, and we are assuming he is one of the people here that is guilty or was ineligible. So you're talking about 132 wins, up to 132 taken off Coach Boeheim's record. He has 966 wins right now. That would obviously take him way back down in the rankings. He's number 2 on the all-time list behind Coach K. He would be way back, obviously, if that's all upheld. It also includes recruiting restrictions for 2 years. The Orange would go from 4 guys out on the road recruiting down to 2. So it cuts it in half. So those 2 guys who are on the road are going to be on the road like constantly, because that is a big deal to get into the living rooms of some of these highly touted recruits that they're trying to bring in here and try and convince them to come. You're not going to be able to get into as many houses now and watch as many people live. So significant penalties for what the NCAA is calling a level 1 severe breach of conduct. So SU's self-imposed postseason ban, that's been accepted by the NCAA, but they have added a laundry list of other sanctions against the program, some of which are very significant. We will be continuing to follow this throughout the afternoon. Of course, we'll have more coverage as we continue here. The Syracuse University has said it is going to have a press conference at some point this afternoon. We will work to bring that to you as well as it happens, and hopefully that will happen here shortly. continuing coverage, as I said, throughout the afternoon. We're going to be talking to fans, others affected by this. And later tonight, Sports Night from right here, 11 o'clock actually. We're going to go a full half an hour as we did when Syracuse University announced its self-imposed ban a little more than a month ago. We're going to break this all down for you. Full half an hour. We'll have a reaction, hopefully, from some former Syracuse players. Howard Trish has said he's going to come in and give us his thoughts on all of this. So tune in tonight at 11 o'clock tonight, and we'll wrap this all up for you in a full 30-minute program. But stay with us again throughout the afternoon for more coverage here on the infractions committed by Syracuse University and the sanctions handed down earlier today by the NCAA. I'm Mark Larson. We'll see you later on today. For now, let's send you back to the news.
Be Healthy on Local On Demand is an all-new destination on Time Warner Cable that has everything you need to know to live better and to lead a healthy lifestyle. Inspirational stories, tips for healthy living, and expert advice from local healthcare professionals. Be Healthy is packed with exclusive insights and valuable information all in one place. Check out the Be Healthy tab and other content areas on Local On Demand, only on Time Warner Cable, Channel 1020.
Weather on the Ones, all day, every day, only on Time Warner Cable News.
The game of basketball is math and science in motion. Geometry, physics, algebra, and even chemistry come alive on the court. But most kids who love the sport don't see the connection. Time Warner Cable is helping take young people's passion for basketball and other sports and convert it into a passion for math and science. Visit connectamillionminds.com to learn more. Together, we can give young people the tools they need to win.
Meet the best and brightest scholar athletes on Time Warner Cable News. Looking for a getaway? Something exotic? Relaxing? Or just for the kids? Time Warner Cable News has some great suggestions.
I'll fill you in on some great travel packages from down the street, across the country, or around the world.
Travel. Watch it on Time Warner Cable News. Meet the best and brightest scholar athletes on Time Warner Cable News.
Imagine if you had the power to choose whatever weather you wanted. Sunny and warm? You got it. Lawn needs a little water? No problem. The thing is, it's not possible. With Weather on the Ones, we can't control the weather, but we can give you updates every 10 minutes. So you'll be prepared for whatever weather conditions come your way. Weather on the Ones, only on Time Warner Cable News.
Capital Tonight, weeknights at 8 on Time Warner Cable News.
Hello everyone, I'm Time Warner Cable News meteorologist Courtney Furtado, and we have high pressure in control providing